can access them if you want to review what we've done. So we're going to talk about the media and drug use. And this is kind of an interesting thing because the media is very sensationalistic when it comes to drug use. Isn't there always a drug use or drug stories or anything? There's always news about drugs. Have you noticed that?
Yes.
Oh, I like hearing Yesenia talk. Good. There's, okay, so now I'm getting an echo, so hold on. Was that Yesenia?
To me?
Okay, now it's, let me talk. Leave your mic on and let me talk. Talk to me.
Okay, it's on.
It's on?
Yeah.
No, you're good. You're really good. So, yeah, so keep yours on, okay?
Okay.
Because I want you to talk to me, because you know how hard it is when I'm talking to myself.
Okay.
It's easier. Okay, so drugs in the news. If you guys notice, there's always a huge part of the news or a large part of the news is on drugs. Have you noticed that? Stories about drugs? A lot of celebrity drug use right now is the trend, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so if we think about the news, let's just start with that. Or, I'm sorry, the media. What do you consider the media? You can write it in the side.
I would think
Um,
anything that comes up on TV and the radio, like advertisement.
okay, advertisements and, hold on one second. Hang on, I'm just waiting for people to evacuate my room. Oh my God. You know? No, I know. I'm like that woman from the Real Housewives where you just turn like pink because I'm so stressed out and it's so hot in here. You know who I'm talking about? That one who gets like, what is that called? You know, actually, I had this epidural. I had a steroid injection in my back yesterday. I have to get them every 5 months because there's a problem with my back, and I have a lot of back pain, and I think it's causing me to like flush, like it's a side effect of the drug. Because normally I don't break out in hives like that woman. But anyway, so let's get back to this because this is more interesting. So first we start off by just defining what the media is so we have a good understanding of what the media is. And I actually have some stuff up here. So let's go with this, what I have on this chart. I have written down, and I think he has this in the book, newspapers, TV, comedy, films, documentaries. So you don't even think, the media doesn't have to necessarily be news, but a lot of information that we get about drugs, you'll see comes from what we saw in a film, or maybe fiction stuff, or, you know, it can be documentaries, videotapes, television, news, comedy, advertising. So media could be anything, and we get a lot of information about drugs, and we believe that information when in reality a lot of it is very inaccurate. So the point of this chapter is to really kind of point out that the information that we have about drugs is often inaccurate. Okay, so that's like the main point that he's trying to make in the book. And there's different degrees of inaccuracy. Some of the inaccuracy is just completely fictional, where people just make up, historically they've made up a lot of stories about drugs that are untrue. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, you'll hear all sorts of stuff. We'll go through a bunch. So that's one issue. The other thing is that a lot of times they'll give you information about drugs, but it's kind of biased information, so it's kind of like they're presenting one side of a story, or they're giving you statistics that are misrepresenting something. So we'll talk about that too. Or they'll exaggerate the negative effects of drugs. So we're going to talk about that too. So do I want to start here? I think I do. Let's start with this idea of sensationalism. Well, actually, why don't we just start with this story? Did you guys have an opportunity to read, because I asked you to, the Janice Cook story? Did you see the Janice Cook story? This is a very famous story. It's actually, I think he has it in the book, and then it's in the, I gave you a handout in your documents, so if you refer to your table, you should see it. Did you see it, Yesenia?
I just read one of the hormones about the reporters that they were fired because they wouldn't.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that one, so you can talk about more about that when we get there. Jimmy's World, did you read that one?
Yeah, and
okay.
Giving up the ghostwriters. That's the 3 I read.
Okay, cool. Okay, so I'm talking about Jimmy's World. So Jimmy's World was this very interesting story that came out in the 1980s, and the story basically is about this little boy who's like, I think he's like 5 or 6, and no, he's 8, and he's like a third-generation heroin addict. And this woman, Janet Cook, wrote about his life, and she wrote pretty much that he was a little addict in the Washington, D.C. area, and that heroin was kind of taking over, and even like 8-year-old kids were doing it. And she really just went on and on and on. What are some other things she talked about in here? She talked about like his mother being a prostitute, and he was probably fathered by this pimp, I think, and there was all these, it was a very sensationalistic story. It was sensationalistic because it was almost unbelievable, right? And people were just amazed by it. And people like sensationalism because when something's sensationalistic, it's kind of thrilling and it creates an intense reaction or exaggerated emotion. Like kind of like I put a roller coaster there. And we tend to remember things when they're sensationalistic. I don't know if you realize that, but if you think about your friends or people you know, are you going to remember when they blew up at somebody more so than like their average thing? We remember like the outrageous, right? Yeah. So that sticks in our head, and it attracts us too. We like it. We like to hear outrageous stories. So anyway, this was quite an outrageous story, and she made a lot of different statements. Some of the statements that she said was she talked about him being an addict since he was 5, how his world is described as one of hard drugs, fast money, and the good life, and she's talking about an 8-year-old. The mother was raped and then turned to prostitution. She says that, and she does a lot of exaggeration, okay? So when she's talking about him, she exaggerates the number of people engaging in the behavior. She says stuff like, the mother says everybody does it. She says drugs and black folk have been together for a long time. She makes these wide, sweeping statements that aren't necessarily true. In the article, when we know in reality, and I'll show you some statistics, African Americans are not more likely to use illicit drugs. Native Americans are actually more likely to use, if you look at illicit drugs completely. Hispanics and whites are more likely. So she's making these statements that aren't really true, but she's using them for an effect. But now everybody's reading this story because the story went over, these are just the heroin use, 69% white, 21% black, 9% Hispanic. She kind of loosely uses these what do you call it, statistics. And a lot of times when you read stories that are news stories, you're going to see people loosely using statistics. She also exaggerates these are themes, exaggerates the amount of harm a behavior causes. So she states that the heroin problem is impacting thousands of kids in the Washington inner city. Well, the reality is, if you look at the statistics on heroin use, it is extremely low among teenagers, and it's been pretty consistent throughout history. If you look historically, you know, since they've been tracking, which is the early 70s till now, it's changed a little bit, but not that much. Only about 2.4% of 9th through 12th graders have ever even used it, and lifetime use was 3.6 Hispanic, 2.2 black, and 2.2 white, and it's lowest among African American teens. This is So my point here is that if you hear the news, it sounds like there's such a huge portion of people who are doing it, but if you actually look at studies, you'll find that there's not a lot of people relative to what they're saying. So here's what's kind of interesting, and let's go back to this one. What's interesting about this story is she won this Pulitzer Prize for you know, exposing this kid. At the time, the mayor of New York, not New York, it was Washington, D.C., was like, oh my God, you're telling me that there's people running around, kids running around doing heroin, little kids are all doing heroin in the inner city. We need to figure out where this kid is and get him some help and figure out what's going on. So he started looking for little Jimmy. And what do you think happened when he started looking for little Jimmy?
He didn't find him.
He didn't find him. So if she's talking about this as such a common problem, why is it so hard to find anybody, whether it's Jimmy or not, who's doing these drugs? So, what happened was that was kind of, everybody was like, well, where's Jimmy? Okay, because we got to do something about him. Nobody could find him. And then what else happened was she got this Pulitzer Prize, which is the most prestigious possible prize you can get for writing. And apparently when they reprint the article, I guess once you get the Pulitzer Prize, they want to reprint the article in all these different magazines and newspapers or whatever. And I think the Toledo Blade asked her for her resume. I guess it was being sent out, and she had worked at the Toledo Blade, so people who were there got her resume and noticed that she had a lot of lies on her resume, saying that she had worked places where she hadn't worked. So they said, wait a minute, we think she's full of it. So the mayor, I guess, asked her, where's little Jimmy? Everybody wanted to know, and she finally just admitted, I broke down and said, I wrote this story because there's so much pressure to write a good story in the news, and I just wanted to get, a good story out, because they are pressured to write good stories. So there's this exaggeration that happens, and so she lost her little prize, and I don't think anyone's ever heard of her again. But oftentimes, so what she did here is what we call factual bias. Factual bias is the process of making factually incorrect or empirically false claims. So basically stating facts that are wrong. Example is stating an event that happened when it really didn't. So a lot of times, not a lot, but you may see factual bias in the media. I guess the biggest, the most obvious place you might expect to see it would be like the National Enquirer or something, do you know what I'm saying? Or have you ever seen those magazines huh?
Like when they talk about celebrities that they make up stories.
Yeah, like making up a story about celebrities. Some of them are true, some of them aren't, but we never know, right? So that's factual bias, stating an event that happened when it didn't. Sometimes people do this because they want to justify a moral position, like they want everybody to be on their side. And so that's one kind of bias that you have to be careful of in the media. Another type of bias in the media is called selection bias. Selection bias is, and this is actually more common, selection bias is when you focus only on those facts that support a particular position and ignore facts that undermine it. Selection bias is like persuasive communication. Have you ever had a definition for persuasive communication? Well, everybody always is quick to say Fox News. Well, let me tell you, CNN is just as bad. I'm not a conservative, but I will tell you that CNN is just as bad. They're all bad because they all only present one side. So I don't watch any of those things. It's really sad. But the news today is very biased, most of it. So it's true that if you see somebody presenting on CNN, they'll talk about a situation and leave out certain facts, right, that don't support more of a liberal position. And if you see someone talk about the same issue on Fox, they're going to leave out facts that don't support a conservative position. So it's very unbalanced. And that's kind of what we're hit with, just in general with the news, is a lot of like selection bias. So selection bias is this process where we only focus on facts that support a particular position and we ignore those facts that undermine it. So for example, let me show you how she did it. Well, okay. Worst case scenario. Do you know what a worst case scenario, when they present a worst case scenario as typical? So like, for example, when they say, like, this kid didn't exist. So let's say, even if I could find an 8-year-old heroin addict, it would be extremely rare, right?
Yeah.
But she was presenting it as if it was commonplace. So a lot of times when you see like those expos on news shows, do you know what I'm talking about? Like CNN or I don't know, CBS or whatever. They have those like expos where they'll have like a teenager who took a drug at a rave. The teenager takes the drug at the rave, and then they die, and they do this whole like story about it and how terrible it is, and they present it like it could happen to you.
Yeah.
Look, if it happens to you, it's terrible, right? So I wouldn't want to take that kind of risk. However, it's not a typical scenario. Usually, something like that happens, it's not common. In fact, if you look at ecstasy, the best way to figure out how dangerous ecstasy is to look at how many people go to the hospital and how many people die from it. The percentage of people who use ecstasy who actually die from it is like tiny, teeny weeny, very, very small. So that's a thing called worst case scenario, presented as typical. There was another one that, you know, I saw. I remember this a while ago. It was like probably in 2006. They had these guys who they had video footage of like these teenagers giving this little boy marijuana. Did you see that? It was like on CNN. They played it over and over and over and over again, as if it was something that was happening. And it was African American boys, and they kind of presented it as if it was happening in the African American community. And even if they don't even really present it that way, if you see this over and over and over, this sensationalistic image, it's sensationalistic, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's kind of like exaggerated. You see this over and over and over, it can really create this stereotype in your mind that that's actually real, like really common, because you're seeing the same image of the same people, but it starts to create this thing in your brain that it's actually common. You start to begin to believe it as typical. So that's another example of worst case scenario presented as typical. Right, you have to be very careful. Okay, what was the, I wanted to give you a selection bias one. What's this one? Well, this is, she states here she exaggerates the harm that the behavior comes from, stating that the heroin problem is impacting thousands of kids in Washington. That's factual bias because it's not impacting thousands of kids, right? That would be factual bias. Okay. So she exaggerates the numbers of victims who are harmed by, in her story. Medical experts say the heroin problem is sizable. You know, actually the heroin problem is very small. It's about 455,000 people are reported to have used heroin in the past year. So that's not a lot of people. But anyway, so let me talk about why we engage in selection. Why does selection bias occur? And all of that, and sensationalism. Sorry, sensationalism. Let me go back. So, oh, let me give you another example of sensationalism. Did you guys know that they love to sensationalize illegal drugs? Okay. Did you know that the majority of deaths in the U.S. are due to? Do you think they're due to legal or illegal? Are the majority of drugs today, let me give you a pod. The majority of drugs today Are they due to legal or illegal? Drug deaths. Are the majority of drugs deaths, sorry, the majority of deaths due to drugs due to legal or illegal drugs? Okay, I'm going to open that. Okay, I have 11. One person needs to vote. Is anybody in the room twice? Okay, cool. Okay, so most people got that right. It's actually legal drugs. So let's give you the, yes, legal drugs. So let me give you the number. The majority of deaths here, I'm going to type it in the side so you guys can copy it because I don't have a slide for it. It doesn't matter if you get answers right or wrong to the polls. I'm just interested in you answering them. Okay, so don't freak out if you get it wrong. Majority of deaths in the U.S. are due to legal drugs, and I'll give you some stats. 435,000 tobacco every year. 85, 80 dogs. 85,000 alcohol. 32,000 are due to the adverse effects of pharmaceuticals. 7,600 are due to non-steroid anti-inflammatories. I can't even spell today. And like aspirin. So, but when we think about drugs and we hear about them, which drugs do we always hear about?
The illegal ones.
It's mainly the illegal ones that are demonized. So why is it that we sensationalize drugs? Well, there's a couple reasons that I want to give you. I don't have a slide for this, so make sure to copy this down. Why do we, as a country or whatever, as a society, sensationalize drugs? One reason is that we like to create a moral panic. Or demonize these drugs. Why do we want to create a moral panic? The reason why we want to create a moral panic is that government officials need to create heroes and villains. Do you know what I mean by that? Why would government officials need to create heroes and villains? Okay, tell me what that means. What did Reagan come up with?
I guess just to show that we as Americans were doing the right thing, like maybe compared to Europe where some of these drugs are legal, we want to make ourselves look good.
No, it's more like political reasons. So, for example, if I'm running for office and I want to, if there's a moral panic, like it doesn't have to be true, right? And in society, to gain votes. So sometimes politicians will actually go not based on what is really a serious problem for the country. What they'll actually do is they want to save people so that people will be like, I'm going to vote for Reagan. A lot of people voted for Reagan because he was saying that he was going to like really focus on drugs. And And he created like a lot of moral panic about drug use. So it creates like a reason so that a government official can come in and save um, people, creates the savior. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Do you write it down? Okay.
Yeah.
So a lot of epidemics, moral epidemics, are sometimes not even accurate. And you have to be very careful, because what happens is a public interest group can latch onto something, and if they gain a lot of media attention, it seems like they can create a scare in people, and then it seems like it's such a big deal, and everybody's like, we got to do something about this, we got to do something about it, and we really don't know, is it a big deal or not? The second thing is people believe that they sensationalize drugs to divert attention away from other problems. So a lot of people had said that, during the crack epidemic in the 80s in the inner city, do you guys familiar with that?
No.
Okay, well, in the inner city, there was what they in 1986, there were 74 evening segments on the news about crack. There were like there were over 1,500 stories in the Washington Post on crack in the year crack. I think in the 80s, a year in the 80s. A lot of people felt that in the 80s there was so much media focus on crack, more so than it really was. Like there were some pockets of the inner city that were using crack, but it wasn't like as bad as people say. And a lot of people felt that the reason why Reagan focused on crack was because he was able to shift attention away from what was really going on in the inner city, which was that a lot of social problems were caused by, there were high rates of unemployment, there were high crime rates, and a lot of it was related to joblessness. And the government wasn't really taking any action to clean that up. So what they did do was they focused on the crack issue, and that also created a blame, so that in those groups of people, the whole inner city could kind of be blamed for whatever was going on because they're crack users. So they're all big crack users. Do you follow what I'm saying?
Yes.
Okay, let me let this annoying dog out. Hang on. So can you write that down? Did he talk about that in the book? I don't remember. Does he talk about it in the book, in this chapter? Does anyone remember? Okay, so what did I put there? Create a moral panic. Oh, the other one is to create a moral panic so they can sell newspapers. Moral panic. Did I write divert attention from other problems? And here's the last one. Create a moral panic. Creating a moral panic, and as we saw in the case with Janice, what's her name, Cook, and the little Jimmy story, when you create a moral panic, what do? You sell newspapers, right? Everybody who was watching when Anna Nicole, do you guys remember when Anna Nicole died, Anna Nicole Smith? Mm-hmm. That was not relevant to anybody's life. Nobody really, it didn't pertain to my life. It didn't pertain to your life. A lot of things are more important. The news is supposed to talk about issues that are relevant to the public. Mm-hmm. Whether Anna Nicole Smith OD'd, I mean, I'm sorry that she did, but it's not really a story that should have been publicized as much as it was, right? But it sold. It was sensationalistic, and it sold. People wanted to see it. So moral panics also sell. You know, like, oh my God, every kid is going to be doing ecstasy. And it's always like some, white suburban child that's done it. And almost like, and another thing you'll notice is when you see these stories, what they'll often do is present, I saw one on like heroin addicts among like upper class youth. It was on a few last year sometime. They were talking about this girl and this group of kids who were heroin addicts, and how it was so amazing. And they kept emphasizing, because they were in these like white upper class suburban neighborhoods. What if they keep emphasizing that? Like, it's so shocking because these are kids of privilege and they're using drugs and da 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 da. What does that send the message? That it's normal if you're not of privilege to use drugs, and doesn't it send that message?
It makes it seem that the poor and from different ethnicities, they are the normal users.
Exactly. So that's one of the things that really irritates me when I see news stories like that. The other thing is, to me, it actually is easier if you're now, one of the way, if you have a lot of money and you have a drug problem, you can actually get away with a lot more because you can milk your parents' checkbooks, which is what a lot of these people were doing. Um, you know, and just like their parents weren't noticing that there were hundreds and thousands of dollars missing a year from their checkbook because it was easier for them to go inside the family and steal. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Because there was a lot of money. So it's just interesting. So that's one way that frames. Okay, so what they do, a lot of people feel that we socially construct, I'm going to type it in here, drug epidemics. So let's talk about what a true epidemic is. What is a true epidemic? I guess you could say in 1300 the bubonic plague killed 1/3 of people. That would be a true epidemic, right? Epidemic proportions. So a true epidemic, do you guys heard of the bubonic plague? No? Oh, it was some like weird thing that happened in 1300 where it was like some kind of bacteria, wasn't it? Does anybody know? But was it caused from like disease or rats or something? And it spread in 1300 and killed 1/3 of the population. So 1/3 of this class would not be here. That's a huge problem, right? That's epidemic. The Irish famine, I mean, I'm just trying to put it in perspective. I'm not saying that drugs is great, drugs are great and da 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 da. I'm just trying to put it in perspective. The Irish famine, and also to show you that we're exaggerating a lot. 1846 to 1850, I think 1/8 of Ireland died. HIV, we have 40 million people worldwide affected as HIV positive. 21.8 million people worldwide died of AIDS. Those are really serious problems. If we look at heroin use from my more recent stats, let's look at the heroin epidemic. 1.4% of the population, American population, report ever using. That doesn't mean they're addicted. Just trying. 2.8% of the American population report ever using crack. 3.6% report ever using X. I'm just going to put an X there. And 4.3% ever used, what was that other drug? Meth. So a lot of people argue that we misapply scientific terms, and it has implications for social policies where people then make decisions thinking that something is worse than it is. We make decisions about how to spend money or how to handle situations based on things, based on facts that aren't really there or that are biased in some way. So let's talk about the glue sniffing epidemic of the late 1950s and early 60s. I don't have a slide for this, so I want you guys to write it down, okay? So the late 1950s, early 1960s, prior to 1959, glue sniffing was very unheard of. Do you guys even know what that is?
No.
People would inhale glue
Oh, okay.
and get high from it. So media mentions there were some children arrested in Arizona and Colorado for glue sniffing. So this becomes media mentioned in the media. Um, all of a sudden, this Denver judge says it's the #1 problem in the metro area. There was just a couple kids. It gets all this media attention. So all of a sudden now it's on the news. It was a big deal. And then all of a sudden now they find 130 youth were arrested in Denver for over a 2-year period for using sniffing glue. A lot of people felt that the media attention given to the sniffing glue epidemic when they first found 2 people actually did what? If I hear on TV that sniffing glue is something I can do,
And they're getting into it.
right, so people felt, where's Donisha? But you're young. You weren't around in 1959, right? You guys would sniff glue? Are you kidding? You're being funny? Don't write that kind of... Are you guys all joking? You shouldn't write that stuff if you are kidding. Okay. Just because these tape recordings are going to go, I'm going to keep them, and I may let my other classes listen to them. I don't know if you want that there. Yeah, people would try it if they heard it in the news. So in October 1961, the New York Times published an article describing glue sniffing. 5 months later, 778 people were arrested. So it actually created more glue sniffing arrests. So in 1962, Newsweek said that a 12-year-old glue sniffer tried to kill his father with a knife. They started putting out all these stories about how it's related to hostility, but in reality, the glue sniffing epidemic was actually really overblown, and they felt like, look, if a kid kills himself, tries to kill his father with a knife, it's not from sniffing glue, right? Can't you be a crazy kid who sniffs glue and tries to kill your dad?
Yes.
So they try to make these links that, sniffing glue is related to violent behavior. So with the glue sniffing epidemic, I think the things that I want you to understand from it is that the media inadvertently, so without really knowing, unknowingly led to an increase in drug use among youth because they presented it. They had a couple people doing it. It was sensationalistic. It got media attention, and it just kept spreading and spreading and spreading. So the feeling is that they created this situation. Let's go to another example.
Also,
So remember, yeah.
Also because glue is so accessible, like everybody has it, especially kids when they have to do projects, they're gonna have glue around, so it creates more of a temptation to try it.
Right. You see it on TV, and then you're going to want to do it. I remember when I was in 6th grade, this was back in the 70s, they had all these like drug educational movies. I don't know if they still have them when you guys, some of you younger people, but I remember them showing a kid going down into his basement and sniffing glue, and then they cut to this like psychedelic image that he was like seeing or something, and I was like, wow, I didn't know you could go down to the bottom of your stairs and sniff glue. Like, I didn't want to do it, but I remember thinking, why are they showing us this?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because, so that's one of the issues is people question whether a lot of these, like in the news, you know how like those public service messages about drugs,
Yeah.
A lot of people think that those public service messages might actually normalize or create the idea that more people are doing drugs than actually are, and in fact serve a dispurpose.
Yeah.
This is just one of the things people are saying. Okay, so let me talk to you about this situation. There was this guy, remember I told you about the guy who was in charge of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics, which is now, I think, the FDA? Is it? Or maybe I'm confusing that, but that's not important. This guy, Harry Anslinger, wrote a very famous article on marijuana use. He was in charge of, he was like the drug czar today. You know, the president always has somebody in charge of drugs who's supposed to kind of advise him about drugs. And in the 1930s, he was very against marijuana, and he was the one who got the Marijuana Tax Act pushed. Well, he created this whole big scare that because this one guy who killed a girl, right? And the guy who killed the girl was mentally ill. However, he went on and on and on about how marijuana leads to violence, and he went and told everybody marijuana leads to violence, blah 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 blah, and and cited this story of this guy killing this girl, and that's what the film Reefer Madness is about. It was put out to scare people away from doing marijuana when marijuana was actually does not cause violence at all. In fact, today marijuana is presented as making people lethargic and lazy. So the media presents it very differently today. But back then it was presented that way because he wanted to create a marijuana scare. And he was able to create a marijuana scare by basically making up the story that marijuana causes killing. And what he did was he created a culture of fear. So between 1935 and 1945, marijuana was depicted as dangerous in 95% of the stories. 85% of them mentioned that pot causes violence. 73% said it was highly addictive and moderation was impossible. We know reality-wise that pot does not cause violence. In fact, let me see if I have my stuff on marijuana. Where's my marijuana stuff? Miss Lee, let's see if I can plug that. Okay, let me see. Let me go back because that's all my ad stuff. Okay, let me go back then. And the consequences of this led to the Marijuana Tax Act, and how people think about drugs, I guess, is often shaped by how it's depicted in the media. And media reports are going to affect how people vote, but they're not necessarily true. Let me go, before I get into this theme, let me talk about some other themes. So we talked about the glue sniffing epidemic. Now let's talk about crack. I mentioned that. Were you guys able to write that down, the crack epidemic, and what I talked about with it diverting? Did you guys write it down? Okay, diverting, the unemployment, shifting blame. Another one that, so just write down that the crack epidemic was a way of diverting attention away from Reagan's social and economic policies that really created a lot of problems for people in the inner cities, and kind of blaming them when not all the people in inner city were using the drug, but it made it appear that way. And it allowed them to be blamed for the problems that were happening. Heroin. In the 1990s, the heroin epidemic, so write this one down. Are you ready? It never reached the same amount of attention as other drugs, but there were numerous media reports about heroin that started in the 1990s. In 1996, the media said heroin was now the drug of choice among Generation Xers. Do you guys remember Generation Xers? Okay, so they had an ad actually when Clinton was president, and it said, "Heroin is back, cheaper, more potent, more deadly." And the media and politicians said heroin use was among teens. Oh, they put out this report. Okay, this is a great one. They put out a report. The media and politicians put out a report that basically said heroin use among teens had doubled between 1995 and 1996. 1995 and 1996. Based on that, would you think that that was a lot of people if it had doubled?
Yeah.
Okay, well, let me tell you, somebody went back and checked those statistics. Okay? Based on the study that they were citing, people went back and found out that in 1995, 32 people in the study of 4,500 teens admitted using heroin. And in 1996, oh wait, yes, and in 1996 it was like, no, wait, hold on, it doubled. 14 people in 95 and 32 people in 96. That's what they were saying created the heroin doubled. So what they were doing was they could make it appear more threatening and in that way. So that was something that small sample, but the point is, if you're talking about 4,500 teens, 14 and 32, is that terrible? Like, is that, it doubled sounds really bad, but is it that bad, the use?
No.
But sometimes they like to create these scares, right? So that people will be like, oh my God, do something about this problem. So they make it appear more threatening. And one way you can make something, a drug problem, appear more threatening, you'll see a lot of this is they'll always include children, right? And say that drug dealers are targeting kids, little kids. Little kids, for the most part, are not using drugs commonly. But those are ways to make it more scary and more personal. Ecstasy. You guys know what ecstasy is? We talked about it. It's called an empathogen. It was invented in 1912 by a German psychiatrist, and in 1940s it was called the truth drug by the CIA. And they used it to facilitate trying to get people to tell the truth. They thought it would tell people. And it had been used in psychotherapy, so they were actually legally using it. Hold on. I'm looking for my page on ecstasy. So in 1960s, hold on, they're out of order. In the 1960s, 50s, and 60s, this is my hallucinogenics page. Okay, sorry, my thing's out of order. It was used to facilitate, sorry, my notes are out of order. It was used to facilitate psychotherapy in the 1930s and 60s, and it was viewed as cutting-edge treatment in psychotherapy. Isn't that interesting? And I think people started using it in the 80s. They started to make it illegal. It was made illegal in the 80s, I think, the early 80s, because people started abusing it. And its use, the use of X, actually increased in the late 1990s and early 2000s. And there were a lot of those raves, dance parties, and government officials got really into informing the public about the dangers because there were more use and more of these rave dance parties and stuff. So there were thousands of articles on topics of ecstasy during this time in popular magazines, news, and the internets. So there was also they also started focusing, and during the time they started focusing on Russians because Russian mobsters were supposedly the ones who were importing, and Israeli and Russian mobsters were considered the main traffickers, so the government was like focusing on that. And there was a lot of misleading and fraudulent information that ecstasy caused brain damage. Now, I'll tell you about some studies, and you can tell me what you think. And what kind of bias is this? There was a guy, his name was, well, let's not get into it, it doesn't matter. He worked at Johns Hopkins University, which was actually a very good university, and he published some research where he claimed that ecstasy caused permanent brain damage in humans who use the substance. And he said that one night of use can increase the odds of contracting Parkinson's disease. He said just one night of use. That sounds pretty bad, doesn't it?
Yes.
I'm not saying we should start using it, but I'm just saying that this stuff is not necessarily accurate. So in the study that he based this idea on, he based this on a study of monkeys where they administered 3 consecutive doses of ecstasy in 3-hour intervals to monkeys. So 3 consecutive doses in 3-hour intervals for 6 weeks. And he noticed that the dopamine in their brain dropped. Now he took this and extrapolated it to this idea that it was causing Parkinson's disease. He had no proof that it caused Parkinson's disease, but he said it could, because I think Parkinson's disease is related to lower dopamine levels, perhaps. But he kind of, isn't that a big jump or leap to make some kind of statement like that? So he made a big, and this was widely reported in the media and used to justify the tougher laws that we discussed with the Rave Act. Remember we just talked about the Rave Act where they had like really super duper. And what's interesting is later, researchers later found that these studies were flawed, that these doctors weren't even giving the monkeys ecstasy. They had been giving the monkeys meth by accident because they went back to try to do the findings again with to replicate, do the study over, and other people tried to do it and it wasn't happening. And then they found out that he accidentally was giving them some other drug, methamphetamine. So this, they retracted their findings, but oftentimes when people retract findings, it's not as exciting. Yeah, who knows? It's not as exciting, and so nobody ever hears it or it doesn't stick, right? Because sensationalistic stuff sticks. Like when these celebrities end up getting cleared, nobody listens, right? You only remember what they did, even though it was probably not. So the point here is that X does do impact your serotonin, and over the lifetime, it really could deplete brain supplies and result in more depression among long-term users. But the point is, more problems and more the short-term risks of X are not that, I guess, extreme. You know what I mean? But it's over-exaggerated. And a lot of times, another thing is ecstasy is also mixed oftentimes with many other chemicals that aren't pure, so that's another issue. Okay, let's talk about, so has everybody got that ecstasy one?
Yes.
Okay, I want to talk about hallucinogenics. Okay, hold on. No, that's not what I want. Okay. Okay, we have the heroin. Okay, I think I'm good. Now we're going to go, let me talk about a couple more. These ones I have, these are older. LSD. Here's a theme that was related to LSD in the 1960s. In the 1960s and early 70s, there was a theme that LSD caused genetic mutations. And I remember being in the post office with my mother and seeing this picture of a girl who had, you know, braces on her arms. What are they called? You know what I mean? Because she had muscular, you know, if you have muscular dystrophy. And I remember seeing this in there, and it said something about like LSD causes birth defects. This was going around all over the place. And it was based on this one study that happened in 1967. Now, they were saying LSD causes birth defects when, like, if I used LSD in my 20s, they're not talking about when pregnant. They were saying if you used it in your 20s and you have a baby in, you know, in your later years, that it's going to do something to you that causes genetic mutations. That's what they were arguing.
Okay.
I'm not talking about doing it when you're pregnant. So in 1967, there was this well-respected journal that published an article from which all this stemmed, which found that when human blood cells were placed in these cultures, you know, like a petri dish, with LSD, the drug, that's the hallucinogenic drug that makes you think you're asleep and awake and causes you to hallucinate, that chromosomal damage in the blood resulted. Based on this one story, that it swept the nation, that LSD could cause genetic mutations in your offspring, and they talked about mental retardation and malformation. But it was just based on this one story about a petri dish. Doesn't that seem a little off? And it was one study. There were lots of studies. First of all, there were lots of studies that actually did not prove any genetic damage similar to the one that the LSD study showed. So what do you think, what kind of media bias is that?
That worst case scenario?
It is it sensationalistic or, um, it's sensationalistic, isn't it?
Oh, because it's exaggerated.
exaggerating. So let's go back here. Actually, we'll do the sheet in a second because so it created a culture of fear where LSD now about LSD. LSD is listed as a drug in the Controlled Substance Abuse Act as having a high potential for abuse, addiction, and threats to human safety. And people feel that what happened during this time created this culture of fear about LSD when it's not really that, it's not addictive actually, highly, and its threats to human safety are low. We think LSD is a very dangerous drug when it is not. I'll get into that in a second. I just want to see if there's one more thing here. Okay, no. Um, anyway, let me just say one thing before I finish the LSD thing. So stories swept the nation that LSD could cause genetic mutations. I would say it's selection bias because they're not presenting the whole story. They're just saying, like, it causes genetic mutations. But they're extrapolating from this petri dish to the human person. And then the March of Dimes started distributing pamphlets with kids with physical deformities on the bottom saying LSD and other similar drugs may cause chromosomal damage. None of the kids who appeared on these things were linked with chromosomal damage. 4 years later, researchers conducted an exhaustive review of many articles done by scientists like the one I'm citing in 1967, so about 100 of them, and stated that LSD ingested in moderate amounts will not cause genetic damage. I'm not talking about during pregnancy, but moderate amounts is not going to cause. But that didn't get to the press, and the reason why that didn't get to the press is what? Because it wasn't sensationalistic. Let's talk about PCP. PCP is actually an extremely dangerous drug. Do you guys know what PCP is?
Not
I have something written about it. Does anybody have my writings about PCP? If you go online, there's something that I wrote about it. Does anyone remember what I wrote about it? I wrote about it on my my webpage under announcements. Okay, we can go look at that after. Well, here's what PCP is. People who take PCP is a very dangerous drug, so I want you to know that. It's an extremely dangerous drug. It was originally developed as an anesthetic. You know what an anesthetic is?
to numb you, so you won't feel
Right.
anything.
It blocks the perception of pain. And it was tested for human use in the 1950s, but it was discontinued because it had side effects where it created a lot of confusion and delirium. So they only used it for animals. Okay? The reason why everybody thinks, or you've heard, it's a very, very dangerous drug. It creates a lot of violence. You're very disassociated from yourself, and people do things that are crazy when they're on it. So it is dangerous. Don't get me wrong. The thing about it is, a lot of people have heard, there's some things like, oh, when you're on PCP, it makes you really, really strong. Have you ever heard that before?
No.
They always cite, like, it'll turn a man can lift a car or something like that. These kind of things, they're like urban myths or whatever. The reason why people think people who are on PCP are super strong is because PCP is blocking any perception of pain. Okay? So think about running around a track. When you stop running, why do you stop running? What do you feel that tells you I have to stop running? If you're running across the track or anybody exercise, what happens to you? You feel pain, don't you? You start to feel pain, and the pain is a signal to stop. What happens is with PCP, these people don't feel those signals, and therefore they keep going, because the mind can keep going. It's pain that stops us from continuing. Yes, PCP and angel dust are the same. And Sherm is PCP that was smoked and put in embalming fluid, and that was popular in the 90s. So what happened was, imagine if I were on PCP. You guys done a push-up lately? You should always be able to do a push-up. Very important.
Okay.
that's a side note, right? To show you. Okay. But one thing about push-ups is if you do a push-up, you can start on your knees too. If you do a push-up, you start to stop. There's only so many you can do, right? And then eventually you start to get tired. Your triceps give out, your chest gives out. It becomes very difficult to do. So I can only do like, I don't know, I could probably do about 15, maybe. I don't know. I haven't counted. Yeah, about 15 push-ups, right? After 15, what happens to me? I start to feel pain. So if I were on PCP, I could probably do 100. Why? Because I'm not feeling the pain that's stopping me. Make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So a theme with PCP was that was played out in the 1970s was the sensationalized story that people will gouge out their eyes and become violent. The violence part is true, but in 1978 there was one incident where a person blinded themselves in jail. Okay? He scratched his eyes out while on PCP. Ugh, doesn't that sound awful? But it inspired 17 other untrue stories in 1978 that said that PCP will cause you to scratch your eyes out. And they found out when they went back and looked at these stories, they weren't really true. There was only one story that was true. So what kind of bias is this when they're making up all these other stories that aren't true?
Sensational.
It's sensational, but there's two types of bias, right? We talked about factual and what was the other one? Factual and
Selection.
selection. So what is this one? One was true, but the 17 others cited people who didn't do it.
It's selection.
Factual.
Oh, factual.
No, it's factual because they're untrue. One was true, but they were talking about all these other people who did it that didn't do it. That would be factual. Worst case scenario, remember you were asking me about that?
Yeah.
The worst case scenario story is a form of selection bias, right? Because it's it happened, but they're making it sound like it's more common. These were actually fabricated stories. So in worst case scenario, they take a story that's true and they talk about it as if it's really common. You know, this could happen to anybody. Okay. Okay, oh, we're all the way over there, huh? Okay, so let's do this now. Should we go through, why don't we do the questions and then the factual and selection bias. So did you bring your worksheet?
Yes.
Okay, so we're going to do one and I want everybody to answer. So let's go through these. I'm going to do some polls and I want you to put in your answer. So I'm just going to write question one, but I'm not going to put the whole thing in because I don't have time to type it. So I'm just going to put the first sentence, the first two in 1980, okay? I want you to tell me what kind of bias this is, if it's selection or factual. So you guys, I'm going to open it and I want you to vote. So I have 9 votes right now. 10. There's 13 people here. 12. Okay, the correct answer is factual. It's factual because this kid didn't exist. Okay, let's go to number 2. Good job. That was easy, right?
Yeah.
Okay. The first thing is in the 1960s. Oh, I forgot that. I have to go back and do that. Let me explain that after we do this. So let's do this question. I forgot one thing about LSD that I wanted to tell you guys. 7. Okay, I've got 9 votes. Make sure you vote because you need to get credit. And I'm going to close it soon. 9, 10, 11. Okay, I'm going to close it. Okay, the correct answer is selection bias because they were basically focusing on only the events that were negative. They didn't sit there and present you with stories about all the people who actually sat in their bedroom and stared at the wall on LSD. And this is the second theme associated with LSD, so make sure you go to your slides because I just want to get this one in. Yes, LSD is called acid. LSD in the 1960s, the second theme, it's actually number 1 on the slides, is that it'll make you crazy and place you in danger. And in the 1960s, the media focused on psychotic episodes that aroused from using LSD. It was depicted as the greatest threat facing the country. And all they showed, well, there was one, they showed it as causing psychic terror, uncontrollable impulses, lack of concern for personal safety, psychotic episodes, delusions, hallucinations, impulses leading to self-destruction. It does cause hallucinations and delusions. It does create psychotic episodes, and it can create terror. But a lot of what they were doing was they were kind of going overboard and talking about the examples where people went absolutely crazy on it. And they had there was a couple situations where I think someone jumped off of a bridge. I believe they jumped off of a bridge. It was like a high-profile person's daughter or something. And it was like hippie goes wild on LSD. And so now when you see the movies, whenever someone's on LSD, what do they always do? Do you ever see that one? You ever see it in the movies of the 1960s? There's a movie, what is her name? Goldie Hawn's daughter. Kate Hudson was in it, and it was about music. What was it called? Almost Famous? Almost Famous. And did you ever see that movie? The guy's on acid. Also that other movie with, these might have been like before some of your time. Forrest Gump. I think she was on LSD, his wife, and she was like gonna jump off a ledge or something on LSD, wasn't she?
I only saw that she would do like cocaine, I think.
Was she doing cocaine or was she on acid? I thought she was on acid.
Off, I don't know I don't remember what she had done.
Do you guys, anybody remember?
I don't remember
What was the guy?
what it was.
Who was the guy from Miami Vice? Okay, I'm waiting for her to type. But in the meantime, I'll tell you that the Dawn research, which we're going to talk about, I think it's the next chapter, shows us that only 1 out of 10,000 people who are on LSD actually require medical attention. Most people sit in their house and do nothing when they're on LSD. It is not common for people to engage in this. So that is selection bias because you're only presenting these worst case scenarios, right? You follow me? Angel dust is different from LSD, though. That's PCP. That's okay. I just wanted to let you know. But I'm wondering about that Forrest Gump thing. I have to look at that movie again. Okay, so that was that one. Let me go back. Create another pod. Poll. Okay, hold on for this one. Okay, I'm going to put in 1971, and then you can read it. So start reading it, and then while I make it. And then when we're done with this, we'll take our dinner break for 15 minutes, but let's just finish this, and then it's a good place to stop because I can then start talking about the theories. When I talk about the theories, it's important for you to make sure before you come back that you have this chart that I made for you. It's the theory chart with the examples that I so kindly made. Don't I make great stuff for you?
Yes, it helps out a lot, the charts.
Does it help because it's online too?
Yeah.
I have them with my regular class too, but I'm a big chart maker. I like to make a lot of handouts. I like to do these little questions in all my classes because I think it helps you reinforce it, doesn't
Yeah.
it?
Yeah. It's good to
Okay.
study them too.
Yeah. Examples are key, I think. Um, okay, so this one, I forgot which one we were doing. 1971. Okay, that's factual. So that's a half-half. Here's why. A Baltimore student blinded himself in jail while under the influence of PCP. If the reason why it's factual is they wrote stories about people performing the behavior like Bob Jones in New Jersey gouged his eyes out, and there was no Bob Jones in New Jersey. When they went and looked, there was nobody.
Hmm.
So it's not selection, it's factual. Do you see the difference? It's selection if I'm just talking about the violence associated with PCP.
And
If I'm
factual
just
is
saying,
when you create the same story. Like from one story, you create it multiple times when it only happened once.
yeah, with different characters, right, with different characters. Does that make sense? The
Yeah.
difference between that and worst case scenario? Whereas worst case scenario, what they'll do is they'll talk about some girl who like passes out and dies at a rave, but then they're not going to sit there and tell you like all these other people passed out and died, but they'll start talking about it and going, this could happen to this could happen to your teen. It
Hmm.
could. But they'll start talking about other things like that give you the illusion that it's more common. Like, oh, and ecstasy is happening in X amount of people, are using ecstasy.
Hmm.
Therefore, this is going to increase when in reality, it's so rare to begin with. Does
Yeah.
this make sense, Angelina? Okay, Yesenia, Angelina? I don't know. I'm trying to see if does that make sense to you? Okay. I like that Yesenia is a big participator. That makes me happy. And you guys on the side are good, but everybody has to get on camera. So, pod poll. Our next test is not this week, but the following weekend, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so I have to make your tests up next week. Okay, in the 1930s, so read that one and here are the questions. I'm opening it up. does marijuana cause people? The way that I would kind of break this question down is, he's claiming marijuana causes people to become crazy and kill. That's what you have to focus on. Does it cause people to become crazy and kill? We know from later presentations of marijuana, remember I told you guys that marijuana does not create violence, right?
Mhm.
Marijuana is actually a passive drug. Marijuana now is presented as making people lazy. And we know that it actually does make people lazy because remember I was telling you it impacts the part of your brain that's related to novelty. And if it keeps hitting you up with the novelty thing in your brain, then when you're not on the drug, you don't find anything interesting. It burns that part of your brain out.
And
So you
now,
start to become lazy.
and
Huh?
and it also affects in movement. You said, right? Coordination.
Yes, it does. So it's not great it's slow response time. So it makes you paranoid, which is good for driving in a way, right? I'm not saying you should ever drive with it, but if you compare it to alcohol, what it does is it creates a lot of paranoia. So people with marijuana tend to drive slowly, very slowly, very paranoid, but their reaction time is going to be very bad if, for example, a car comes out of nowhere or a deer comes out of you can't swerve in time because your reaction time is low. And also driving slowly isn't good. So it's not good to drive on that. Okay, so this one's 50-50, and this is actually factual. Focus in on, if you got this wrong, I want you to tell me, it's not a fact though. That's the thing, Denisha. It does marijuana cause people to become crazy and kill? That's not a fact. It doesn't do that, so that's why it's a lie. So it's factual. Let's look at the next one. Oh, duh. I need to create a pod. Add a poll. This one is question. This one's Harry Anslinger again. You only have 8 votes. $13, $12. Okay. 13. Okay, I'm going to close it. Going to close it. Seems like there's only 13 people voting, right? That tells me that there's 2 people who open. Oh, well, Rhonda's in twice. So that's what it is. But Rhonda just went out. Okay, right, okay. So the actual answer for this is selection bias, because he talks about how he killed on marijuana, but he forgets to mention that the guy was psychotic to begin with, right? So he leaves out that information. So that's like the difference. Like, okay, cool. Well, here's the last one, I think. Oh, this is one of my favorites. And this is true. Do you guys remember Gardasil? I don't know if there's anything wrong with Gardasil, so don't take this, because after I first did it, people were like, Rhonda, number 5 was selection. Number 5 was selection. Yeah, don't. I'm just telling you. I mean, they don't tell you about the longitudinal effects on the ad, And yes, it's only been tested with them up to 17 months. But you'll find when we go into legal drugs, I hope we have time to talk about pharmaceutical companies, that you'll find that they tend to do these tests for all these drugs very short term. Pharmaceutical companies tend to, the public is actually the long-term clinical trial. Prozac was tested on for 8 weeks before, or something less than 17 weeks before it hit the market. The big test is on, it's not a bad vaccine. I'm not telling you that it's bad. I'm just telling you that it was only tested in women for up to 17 months. Now it's been around for a while. So please don't take me for that. Don't use this for anything other than just the question. I don't think it's been ever associated to my knowledge with anything bad. I have never, like, I don't know, Gardasil wasn't around for, I mean, it just came out, didn't it? Isn't it something that if you have a daughter, they tell you to put your daughter on it or something? Or do they tell women to do it? Young women in their 20s, they want them to take it? See, no doctor has ever asked, well, I'm a married woman, but no doctor has ever, I think I've been married since this has been out.
So if you're married, they don't offer it to you?
Probably not because they figure you're not going to be with people who are, I guess
Oh,
you're not cheating or something.
okay.
I don't know why. I don't know if that's why it's never been offered to me or my doctor doesn't believe in it. I've never asked him about it. I should, just out of interest. I don't have a daughter, so I just haven't stressed out about it. But if I did have a daughter, I think I would be kind of freaked out by it because I really didn't know. You know what I mean? Like, should she
Yeah.
unnecessarily take this? Um, that kind of thing. They still ask you if you're married and stuff. How many times do you have to take it? It's selection, right? Because they're only leaving in information. It's persuasive communication, which is only leaving in information that's going to make you want to take it. And if you see, I remember this, the way that I got this was Gardasil was being talked about by like Kathy Lee Gifford or somebody on the morning show, and the pharmaceutical company wants to get on that show, right? So they send a representative to talk all about how positive it is in the form of news. You see what I mean? You have to be careful. I'm not saying that it's bad, but I don't know, and I never really truly investigated it. Okay, so let's see. It's 7:58. Why don't we come back at 8:15? Okay, and we will go have dinner. We'll be back at 8:15, and we'll do the rest of the chapter. And make sure, actually, the rest of the chapter is gonna. It'll probably take the full time, but it'll run smoothly. So make sure you have your chart with you. Okay.
Okay.
All right, guys. I'll see you in at 8:15.
Okay.
Okay, who is coming back? Donisha, is Donisha coming back? Let me see who's here. Okay, so just let me know if you're here. Okay, I want to talk about public service announcements, and then we're going to talk about um, the theories. I have 8 people. Okay, if you're here, Teresa, Angelina, can you come on camera? Angelina, I'm going to put you back on. I'm enabling your audio. When we go on for break, please don't go off. You don't have to do that unless well, I guess if you want privacy while you're eating, but if you don't have to. It's easier because then we don't have to go through this whole thing. There you are. Okay, Daniel, why don't you come up? My face is still so red. What about Corey Phillips? Corey Phillips isn't here. Tanya, who hasn't been up? If you haven't been up, you need to let me know. Alexandra. Okay, so one thing I want to talk about before we get into the theories are anti-drug advertising campaigns, which we see on TV. Okay, you know what you should do is email Kevin to ask him if you can, if he has any advice about that. Because I had people with mics before in my classes, and they never had any trouble with it. So it might just be that you're not setting it up properly. Okay, who else is coming up? Daniel. Okay, I'm waiting for Daniel. Here he is. There you are. Can you talk? You don't even look familiar to me. I forgot all about you. Turn your mic on. See the piece up here next to where you turned on your video? I'm not frozen. Do I look frozen? He is frozen. You're right. Daniel is frozen. No, he's not. There he is. You look frozen. I don't know. Maybe, do you have somebody playing Netflix at your house? Anybody on the computer besides you? You're on, but yeah. Okay, I'm going to get started. Let's talk about anti-drug abuse, anti-drug advertising campaigns. So, do you guys, you know those things where they tell you like Partnership for a Drug-Free America and all that other stuff? Have you seen those? Do you know what I'm talking about? Where they have these like public service announcements and stuff? Okay, so anti-drug Okay, I don't have slides for this, so I'm just going to type here. Anti-drug advertising campaigns. That's what we're going to talk about for a second. So the Partnership for the Drug-Free of a Partner. Joan, yes, you can come on camera. Anybody who wants to be on camera will be on camera. I love it. Okay, Daniel, I don't know, you're not talking. Is that, can you not get it to work? What's the problem with Yesenia? Yeah, I don't know. Yesenia?
Am I the only one in here?
Who? Can you hear me? Sometimes if you have like someone watching Netflix, it'll screw up the thing, the bandwidth for us. Okay. So let me just start with this now. Okay, so the Partnership for a Drug-Free America, it's called PFDA, and the Office of National Drug Control Policy work together a lot of the times. The Office of National Drug Policy was established, so the Office of National Drug Control Policy was established, I just want you to know what this is, in 1988 as part of the Anti-Drug Abuse Act, okay? I just want you to know what this is because it's all connected. In 1988. And the goal was to establish policies and priorities and objectives for illicit drug use. So the goal was to establish priorities related to illicit drug use, like things like trafficking, drug use, trafficking, crime, violence related to drugs. Okay, that's what their job was, and health consequences, to look at health consequences, to have a stance on the health consequences associated with drugs. So because this is, it kind of represents, like, I think the president actually hires the person who becomes in charge of the National Drug Control Office, or the Office of National Drug Control Policy, and this person kind of is a liaison and represents like what kind of drug policy the president wants to have. Do they want to be hard on a particular drug? Do they want to be soft on it? It's hired by the president. So it's every time someone comes into office, they create this. And the person who's in charge, it's kind of like the Federal Bureau of Narcotics was. The person who's in charge of it is known as the drug czar, and they also oversee international and national drug control policies. So it's hired by the president, known as the drug czar, and they are in charge of representing the president's perspective on international and national, sorry about my typing, so small these words, drug control policy. Okay? You guys get my idea? Sometimes this group will work in tandem with the Partnership for Drug-Free America. So the Partnership for Drug-Free America will sometimes do something together with this this drug control office. Okay, the drug czar. Does this make sense? So sometimes they can, like if a president is really down on a certain drug, they can get a public service message out. Does this make sense? Doesn't have to necessarily be all that correct. So let me just go back now. So you know what the you know what the Office of National Drug Control Policy is. They sometimes work, not always, in tandem with the Partnership for Drug-Free America that puts on those public service messages. And let me tell you about them and make some notes. So the Partnership for, I'm going to tell you about the Partnership for Drug-Free America. You can write PFDA. This is the way you can write it in your notes too. So for the past 3 decades, they've received substantial amounts of money. And they started in 1986, and they have ads in TV, comic books, shopping bags, placemats, videos, bumper stickers, etc., and on the sides of buses. And since they started, they operate pretty much on donation, and they've received more than $3 billion in donations. So they've got some cash behind them. What's interesting, I'm just saying, is that the Partnership for Drug-Free America is headed by this guy named James Burke. And James Burke is the former chief financial officer for Johnson & Johnson. What does Johnson & Johnson represent? It's shampoo, but it's also a huge pharmaceutical company. It's a pharmaceutical company. Johnson & Johnson makes Nicotrol, Tylenol, and numerous prescription medications. Okay, so a lot of people feel that because there's this pharmaceutical interest and people are creating private donations, that's going to affect the kinds of messages that they're going to put on. So for example, they're not going to maybe talk so much about prescription meds as they would heroin, marijuana. Do you understand what I'm saying? Their choices may be different. So a lot of people feel it's contradictory because Johnson & Johnson has some drugs that they sell, and a lot of these drugs that they talk about are all drugs that alter the mind and body, but it's only like they tend to focus on illegal drugs. For a long time, they didn't even focus on alcohol and tobacco. Prior to 2005, they were accepting money from tobacco and alcohol companies. And therefore, do you think they had a lot of stuff on that? Prior to 2005? They stopped in 2005. But do you think if they're getting a lot of money about alcohol and tobacco companies, they're going to be focusing on putting those on? Right, exactly. So a lot of their major financial contributors up until 2005 were alcohol, tobacco, and pharmaceutical companies. Pharmaceutical companies still. Up to 2005, a lot of their contributors of money were alcohol and tobacco. So doesn't that create a lot of bias, wouldn't you say? And what happened was, in 2001 actually, the PFDA accepted over $5 million from tobacco, alcohol, pharmaceuticals, for prescription drugs. And basically, ignored them in public service messages. So that's why people are down on them. So now I'm going to go over some problems with the ads that people feel are bad, and then we're going to go over some ads, okay? Some problems with the ads are people feel that they serve to reinforce myths and stereotypes about drugs, that they don't actually, because remember we were talking about stereotypes about drugs. Like this class, we're trying to be more informative about what's really going on with drugs. I'm not saying drugs are good, don't get me wrong, but we're trying to kind of, you know, think about drugs realistically and objectively as opposed to emotionally. And so here's some of the things that people feel, and we're going to go through and look at these patterns. And I want you to look at, I'm going to write these patterns down, and then when we talk about it, I want you to show me where you see these things being, these problems. Okay, so here's problems with the ads, themes. So one is they serve to reinforce myths and stereotypes about drugs. And here are some of the myths and stereotypes. One is illegal drugs cause brain damage. That's one of the myths. B, pot is a gateway drug. Pot is not a gateway drug, and we can talk about that. Are you guys surprised? Or did we already talk about that? C, pot leads to violence. D, illegal drugs lead to sex. E, illegal drug traffickers are dangerous, I don't know if I spelled that right, foreigners, which is kind of similar to those immigration things we talked about. Remember how immigrants were always tied to drugs in the history chapter? So I'm going to go through some examples, and you tell me where you see this, of commercials. I actually tried to get the commercials from them, and I called them and asked them for specific commercials, but they wouldn't give them to me, and I can't get them on YouTube. And you think you can get them, but you can't. Everybody's tried because there's like made-up ones. So here's a commercial that they have, and I'm sure you guys have seen it. It's a commercial of a brainwave pattern of a 14-year-old marijuana user. Have you ever seen this one? Okay, well, it shows you this brainwave pattern of this 14-year-old marijuana user, and it starts with, if you're a marijuana user, you are not using your brain, okay? What does this tell me? What is the implication of this? If you're using marijuana, you're not. Well, first of all, it's going to make me think that the brainwave is actually coming from someone who is on marijuana, right? But the brainwave was not a person who was on marijuana. It was actually a person who was in a coma. So isn't that kind of misleading? Very. So, but it's telling me that if I consume marijuana, I'm going to have brain damage. The truth is, scientific studies do not indicate any detectable differences in the brainwave patterns of individuals who use marijuana, who are under the influence of marijuana, and those who are not, meaning that when you're under the influence of marijuana, there's no brainwave difference. So that's a very misleading commercial, isn't it? We know that alcohol causes permanent brain damage. If you look at an MRI of somebody who uses alcohol in their brain, you can see a lot of damage in their memory. In fact, if you use tons and tons of alcohol, eventually you'll have signs of dementia that can be confused for Alzheimer's disease. Have you ever seen somebody who drinks really heavily and then all of a sudden they can't remember anything and they're in their 70s and now they're in a wheelchair and you think they're 90? That's because it has a damaging effect on the brain. Okay, so that's not a great representative commercial, is it? So that's kind of showing us, which one? Illegal drugs can cause brain damage, number one. Let me show you another one. In another one, they put out a full-page ad, and this was sponsored in conjunction with the government, so that Office of National Drug Control Policy and the Partnership for Drug-Free America. And this appeared in the New York Times in 1998. It was a full-page ad, and it said, "How a marijuana habit forced Bob Payne onto the street." Okay, that was the quote, and it featured a photo of a father and a daughter, and it gave the impression that he was forced on the street to look for his daughter. And it said, "She was always involved in sports but lost her interest. She dropped out of choir, but she always had a good reason. Eventually, marijuana," the first part kind of rings true with marijuana because it does get rid of motivation. "Eventually, marijuana led her to other drugs, acid and mushrooms." So what stereotype is that? Gateway. So what do I mean by, do you know what they say a gateway is? Do you guys know what gateway theory is? Okay, gateway theory, I want you to know it because it's going to be on the test. Gateway theory basically says that it leads to other drugs. So if I start using marijuana, I'm going to start, so let me just make sure you guys put it in so that you know that you know what it is. And it's in the book, he talks about it in the marijuana chapter. So gateway theory basically says that marijuana leads to using harder drugs. People are kind of, one of the arguments is, oh, they're chasing a stronger high. So they're looking for something, like they start using marijuana and then they want to move on to something more. The reality is that from a public health perspective, we don't believe that there's such a thing as gateway. If you look at hard drug users and people with really bad drug habits, it's true. Most of them started using with marijuana. But does marijuana cause them to become hard drug users? Do you think it does? It doesn't, because the logic is flawed, because here's the deal. If I have a room of 50 people, right, let's say 40 people start using marijuana, right? Let's say 40 people in that 50 choose to use marijuana. Only out of that 40 people who choose to use it, a very, very small fraction will go on to use harder drugs. So you can't argue that it causes it, because if it causes it, you would see a larger percentage of people who try marijuana moving on to harder drugs. Does this make sense? It's not about choice, it's just about numbers. The majority of people who try marijuana do not go on to become hard drug users. And in fact, you could argue that alcohol is a gateway to, and tobacco to harder drugs, right? Because everybody who uses hard drugs started with alcohol, right? But not all the alcoholics become. Okay, so that, you see that one there? What gateway is? Okay, good. So that one is showing gateway, because I'm going to ask you about these on the test, so you should make sure you make notes. Here's another one. An ad in 2003, I remember this one too, and I think they won't give me these because I have to pay for them and I really don't want to give them money. And if it's a public service message, don't you think that they would give it to me for free if I'm a teacher? Instead of trying to charge me 30 bucks for each one. All right. Ad, I really should try to get them though. An ad, I can't get them anywhere. Ad 2000, except from them. 2003, they had a televised image of a teenager being molested and another girl ending up in an unwanted pregnancy, all because she smoked marijuana. All because she smoked marijuana. Do you think that's true? And what is that implying? That to me is implying that marijuana leads to involvement in sexual behavior. And I don't think that's true. So here's another one that perpetuates the violence theme that we saw, starting with, what's that dude called? Harry Anslinger. Are you guys writing these down? Okay. In 2003, 3, I bet you remember this. They had 2 teenagers smoking pot in their father's study. One pulls out a gun from a drawer while the other asked if it was loaded, and then he got shot. Do you remember this one? They're kind of silly, aren't they? This one perpetuates the myth that marijuana leads to violence. And we know marijuana doesn't lead to violence. It's not a violent drug. PCP does. That would be a good one for PCP, but not for marijuana. Okay, here's a nice one from 2002. In 2002, people were really freaked out by 9/11. Do you remember that? Okay, so in 2002, they had a Super Bowl ad, which actually cost them $3.4 million. $3.4 million, and the ad said, "Where do terrorists get their money?" Question mark. And then they were. It said in the ad, "If you buy drugs, it might come from you." So there was a connection between opium, which was a major money-making crop for the Taliban in Afghanistan, but they grossly overstated the links, and they talked about drugs in general. And they also suggested that drug users are aiding terrorists. And that to me sends this very ridiculous image of well, not ridiculous, but doesn't that create an overly harsh image of how we should deal? Would you want to be compassionate towards somebody who's supporting the terrorists or the Taliban? So again, it starts to put this militaristic mentality into people, like that we must deal with these people harshly. And one of the things that's key is, even though, yes, opium was coming from the Taliban, right, or Afghanistan, where the Taliban was, the overwhelming majority, which is what they mentioned, drugs, wasn't it just drugs that they said, comes from people who aren't even related to terrorism. So it was this gross overstatement trying to link it all to the terrorists, and therefore creating this attitude like if you use drugs you're just horrible and you're supporting terrorism. That one came from our good old government in conjunction with the PFDFA. So here's an evaluation of these ads and what people kind of say. Okay, a lot of people feel that they've done some studies, okay, and they've come up with mixed results of whether or not they're effective. So people said it made the ad think they and their friends would be less likely to use drugs after watching it. But the majority of studies, so people think when they watch it, it's going to have an effect on it, but the majority of other studies show that it has little or no effect. And some even think it has a negative effect because it's creating this normative idea that more people are using drugs than they actually are. So I'm a teenager, I see these teenagers smoking pot in their dad's den. Now I think it's something that people do, kind of like the glue sniffing thing, and it becomes more, it's actually feeding that. Does that make sense? It makes it seem like it's normal? Okay. So one study said ads do not lower drugs, and they may be counterproductive. Are you writing this all down? On pot use. But parents like them. They make parents feel good. Parents think they're effective. So here, let me write these out for you. Mixed findings on how good they are or effective. So they said, people said, when asked, people said it made them and their friends think they would be less likely. It wasn't that they were to use. The majority of studies show the ads have little or no effect on behavior. Some say could be negative. The negative ones are that creating the perception that drug use is more common among peers. That's one. The other thing is it might actually create what we call reactance. Do you know what reactance theory is? I talk about it in social psychology. Psychological reactance is, okay, if somebody, this is the best way to explain it. If somebody asks you to do something, right, and they give you the option of doing it, are you going to respond differently if they give you the option of doing it than if they tell you to do it? Move your car. Or versus, can you move your car? Right, if someone gives you the option, you're more likely to actually do it, right? Why? Okay, so you're more likely to do it, right? So a lot of people feel that youth might see these messages that are like, just say no, right, you have more control, just say no, and all this other stuff, and that these messages are so like, they're going to create them to be like, don't take away my control, I'm going to do it anyway. Because they're kind of saying like, it's so bad to use them. It's like putting it to like, oh, you might actually kill somebody because you could have a gun around. You know what I mean? It's so extreme that it makes people feel like more responding, well, that's not true. You know what I mean? Does this make sense? Wait, what is it? Well, I'm working right now. No. Do you understand that? I wish they would shut the door. Thank you. I can't get up. I'm working right now. He wants me to go look at something. Can you hold on a second? Okay, you know when your kids, like our toddlers, they're supposed to sleep with like a bar, right? So they don't fall out of the bed? My husband took the thing off the crib, and now he's going to fall out of the bed. Just so... Do you know what I'm saying? He's going to roll out of the bed tonight. He needs a bar, right? It's just like unbelievable. Sorry. Okay, so does everyone understand reactance? Okay, so they feel that it creates, but here's the real issue. If we don't know that these are effective and that they possibly could be bad, why spend the money, right? We spent $3.5 million on that Super Bowl ad, and one thing we know, guess what we know really gets rid of drug use? Because drug use is related to boredom. What do you think gets rid of drug use? After-school programs, and those are cut. Why not spend the money on stuff we know actually works, like an after-school program? That's kind of where this all leads to. Does this make sense? Like, people think it's a waste of money. And a lot of people feel that it might be better to have like a more mature conversation, to like discuss risks, talk about the pharmacology of the drug so people learn about it, kind of like in our class, to do things like that with people. Some people actually feel we shouldn't have an abstinence-only policy when we talk about drugs. So that's just one thing. Did I talk to you about stereotypes related to meth? I don't think I did I? Let me see. I want to make sure I have that meth. Yeah. I didn't, did I? Okay, we're going to go back to that if we have time, but I want to go through these theories now, okay? You just have to remind me if I don't talk about it. Okay, let's talk about theories. So why do theories of media bias exist? Well, there's a couple theories. So I want you, and we can do this really quickly because I have that chart there. And if we have a little time, I'm going to go through the meth thing, but I don't think I'm going to do that. It doesn't matter. It's not that big of a deal. It's just another example of factual bias. But let's go through. Okay. So a lot of people, remember I was saying, like, why does it exist? And I gave you some of that stuff. Well, here's, I gave you some reasons, like, about the government and everything and why the government likes to have epidemics. They can save people and all this other stuff. But these are theories from, like, kind of like a business end in the media. Well, some of them, like, why does the media actually do it? You know, why does the media actually carry these out? So there's a bunch of different theories. So the first theory is called top-down theory. Is there a worksheet for this? No, there is not, right? Okay. Top-down theory, basically this theory, and I give you a nice example too in the side here, is basically this theory says, and it's known as institutional dominance and elite dominance theory, says the media consciously or unconsciously serves the power, the interests of those in power, and that's why they do, they put sensationalism on TV. I hate when he walks in my workroom. You know what I mean? It's interrupting. It's rude. Okay, so I know I'm in a bad mood today. I have zero tolerance because I'm like, my face is like this. The media consciously or unconsciously serves the interests of those in power. So what that's basically saying is the media is going to put stuff on TV because it's going to support people at the top and protect people at the top, people in power. I can give you a great example of this that's very just basic. So, for example, back in, I think it was like Bush 1, because during the Vietnam War, when there was a lot of people opposed the war because they kept seeing in the media bodies coming over. You know what I'm talking about? So people didn't like the war. Because if you see bodies coming over, what are you going to want to do? You hear that all these people are dying. You're not going to want to participate. People are going to start to rebel against the war, and that's what actually happened. So what Bush 1 did, he was smart, when they went into war, when Bush was president, he basically made this ban that you can't show body bags on television. So the news couldn't show bodies coming through. Did you guys know that? You couldn't, it was against the rules. Because my husband works in the news industry. Some people know, some people, yeah. Bush 2 did it. And then Obama lifted it. It was one of the first things that he did. So the reason why is to protect the people in power, because if I see that, or a lot of people see that, they're going to be upset, and they're going to get angry, and they're going to go against the policies that are by the people in power. Make sense? So it's kind of like with the drug thing, that they basically say that the media does this to serve the interest in power. So a great example is this Anna Nicole thing. So, for example, do you remember when Anna Nicole OD'd at the Hard Rock and it was on television all the time? Do you remember? It was the same time we were at war. Do you guys remember? It was in 2008, I think? 2007. It was 2007. Okay, well, she overdosed, and it was all over the TV. And then they even did like a trial and all this stuff. And it was a very sensationalistic story. The woman dies, da-da-da-da, drug overdose, big superstar, whatever. Gone, you know, person whose luck went bad. A lot of people felt, now if you were going to argue this top-down theory, you could say, I'm not saying that this is what happened, but you could say they played, this is a theory, they played the Anna Nicole story so we were unaware of what was going on in the war. Does that make sense? Consciously, and therefore the people stay in power. The other way you could argue it is you could say it was unconscious, meaning that they played the story, but they didn't have that motive, but then people forgot about the war, and it unconsciously created this forgetfulness in the American public about the war. They didn't do it on purpose. It was just that it was just a coincidence, and therefore supported the people at the top. Does that make sense? Okay, that's called top-down. I always have an example, if you want to really understand consciously versus unconsciously. Do you remember when Hurricane Katrina hit? That was a while ago. That was 2005, right? Was it 2005? Well, in that case, remember they always said, I think I have it here. In that case, they said that they would say, like, people were very upset because when African Americans were trying to survive and get food and stuff, they always framed them as looters. The media people, the reporters would always frame people as looting if they were African American, and people felt that, and I think that was unconscious, meaning that was just the bias of the reporter. So there's a lot of reporters who were biased. That's unconscious when someone does it just out of their sheer habit of stupidity. But then if it were conscious, therefore it makes the white people look okay when the white people were doing it, it was commandeering, which is a very pleasant word. So that's kind of top-down theory, unconscious. Consciously is, let me give you an example from this pharmaceutical company. So if you see that thing, did you guys read that thing about Vioxx that I gave you? Let me just briefly tell you what that was about. In the New England Journal of Medicine is a very prestigious journal, and they actually publish articles, and people really rely on them, and they help doctors make decisions about drugs. Vioxx is made by the pharmaceutical company Merck. Vioxx hired 2 ghostwriters. They paid people without the journal knowing to write articles about research on this drug's safety. So the 2 PhDs or whatever getting money from Vioxx wrote these articles, they actually worked for Vioxx, that omitted information that Vioxx causes heart attacks. And it later got out that the company did this. They paid people to omit this information. They removed Vioxx from the market. What kind of example is that? Now, why is this top-down theory? Because it keeps the pharmaceutical companies in power, and they can continue to sell, right, what they want to. So what kind of media bias is that? Selection. Yeah, let me just get my dog out. Okay, so I have another one on that. Hold on. Did you guys read the one about the grocers in Florida? Look at that for a second. This is another good example. This is about hormones in milk, and basically, I think there's actually a movie about this called The Corporation or something, but these grocers in Florida promised that they weren't going to put synthetic hormones in milk at these supermarkets, and they promised the public they weren't going to do it until there was more testing and all this other stuff. Fox Local News found out that, in fact, they were selling hormone milk to people in these Florida supermarkets, and they weren't labeling it. The public was going to be extremely angry when Fox was going to do this expo. Doesn't that make you mad, Angelina? So they were going to do this expo on it. And when the Fox head of the news heard about it, he threatened to fire these people who wanted to do the expo because he didn't want the grocery store to get in trouble, because they were this huge corporation. It was like a multinational, conglomerate. So they own huge things like car companies and all this other stuff. And so they fired the people, the reporters. So why would they do that? Because the company threatened. They said if they put these on, we're not going to give you any more money, and we're not going to pay your commercial time, right? So in this way, it's top-down theory because it's supporting those people in power. The story eventually broke, and people know about it. I don't know, to be honest with you, Alexandra, I really don't know if it has to do with the hormones in the food or not. I know that it has to do with obesity. So, I worked in an obesity lab because I'm a physical activity researcher, a public health researcher, and what happens is kids go into fat is associated with hormones. So, and hormones are associated with cancer. So if you have too much weight, fat weight, it creates early puberty. So it's not just obesity, but overweight and obesity are associated with increased cancer-generating hormones. Fat is a place for cancer to breed. It's a breeding ground. There's all sorts of hormonal things that are going on in there, in the fat, and it alters the normal hormonal balance of your body. That's where all your fat is stored. Did you guys know that? I don't know what the deal is really. I actually wrote something. There's something that I wrote about physical activity and hormones and stuff, and you can get it on the web. I wrote it with a bunch of people for the Women's Sports Foundation. It's called Her Life Depends on It. If you type that in, it'll come up and you can read a report, and it has all the stuff about chronic disease and physical activity, and that talks about the hormones. I wrote that. It's on the web. But the chronic disease part will talk about obesity and hormones and cancer. So in this case, this example is top-down because they're protecting the multi-conglomerate corporation, right? But there's another reason why they did it, which is kind of similar, right? It's for power, but it was also for what we call money, right? Now this leads me to this other theory. This theory says that media companies are only interested in bottom line earning profits. I would say that there's a little of all of this, but this is probably the most predominant one. And sensationalism sells. Drug stories sell. So if I can sell a story, right, and it goes on TV, I'm going to get more commercial money, right? That's why, who are those people? The Jersey Shore. They get so much money. They get so many viewers that the more viewers you have, the more you can charge for commercial time. So in the case with the grocers, it was actually about money because they told them that they were going to pull the money if they didn't put those hormones on television. So does that make sense? So that's another theory. So Fox News drops the story about hormones because they're afraid of losing advertising. They put Anna Nicole all over because it was sensationalistic in itself. It got better ratings. Similarly to the Michael Jackson story, right? Like when Michael Jackson died, it was all about money. Okay, let's look at populist theory. We're almost done. Populist theory is kind of the same, so they're all similar, and that's a theory which I think it's more money machine. But populist theory basically says the media only airs what people want to hear. So the only reason why Michael Jackson was on, the only reason why Anna Nicole's drug story was on is because, and Britney's breakdown on drugs, the only reason why is because we the people like it. So it's kind of tied into money machine because in order for them to be able to sell a story and sell the ad space in between stories, people have to like it. So it's tied into populist. They're all overlapping. And they say that sensationalism is what people want to hear. Following me, Daniel? Good. Isn't it weird? Don't you feel like we're in the same room, Daniel? So funny. Okay. Does everybody get that one? These aren't that hard. Plus you have the chart here. The last one, which is basically, okay, I have an example, is called professional subculture theory. And people say that professional subculture theory is the old 1950s type of theory about how news really should be. And news basically was, and this is like kind of like Walter Cronkite news from the 1950s when it first came out. They basically, the media used to say that people who work in the media care about accuracy and human interest. So people actually did used to want to tell an accurate story, but it had to be something that was interesting and human that we can relate to. So, but it had to be accurate. So like the Anna Nicole story was a story that had human interest because she was a mother, she died suddenly, you know what I mean? She was a daughter. We all know somebody who has somebody in their family or a friend's, close friend's family who uses drugs, maybe has died tragically from drugs, so it's appealing to us. But the old kind of media view is that it should be accurate, meaning you should check your sources. So they say, well, yeah, sensationalism is going to make the story more human, and that's why we use sensationalism. But the professional subculture theory is kind of like the old news, and now today, what they are generally, I feel, are more into the money machine. It's more money machine, and they don't really check their facts well. Claims my husband, who worked there for many years. Anybody have any questions? Because that's all I have. What worksheet? No, I do have a. Do I have a worksheet? Wait. Do have a worksheet, don't I? We have to do that. Sorry, but I gotta find it because I don't have it here. There's a worksheet for these theories, right? Top down. No, there's another worksheet. Isn't there a top down theory worksheet? Or is there not? Oh, maybe I'm wrong then. Maybe this is the worksheet I was going to do. Let me just check. Hold on a second. I feel like I have a worksheet for this. Top-down theory. Hold on. Let me go to Blackboard for 1 second. Maybe I don't. Or maybe I think I had one. I don't know why. I've been teaching this class for 5 years. I should know this, but I forgot. 63. So I go to assignments. Chapter 5, right? No, you're right. I don't have one. Oh, okay. So the next chapter we're going to do is chapter 6. And chapter 6 has a assignment with it. So what you guys need to do is make sure you bring that, okay? You're right. This is referring to the other one. Okay, so that would be, when are we meeting again? Monday? Oh, yeah. So we won't see each other until Monday. So is that good? Are you guys good? Okay, have a really good night. And thank